Have you ever woken up in the morning, looked out the window, and felt like everything around you was repeating itself just like the day before? Do you feel like you're living each day unconsciously, as if life is just a series of repetitive tasks, lacking highlights and motivation? Sometimes we ask ourselves, is it too late to change, to start over, to find a new purpose in life? If these questions have ever crossed your mind, then this video is for you. It's not just a story, but an inspiring journey of hope, recovery, and the belief that it's never too late to change. Today, I want to tell you about Thomas, an ordinary man just like many others. He is not a millionaire, an inventor, or a celebrity. Thomas is a man who spent almost his entire life in a small town, living a simple and stable life. However, that very stability became a trap that kept him stuck in a monotonous cycle. Day after day, Thomas felt like a small boat lost in a vast ocean, not knowing where he was heading or how to find his way again. At the age of 60, after retiring, Thomas's life became eerily quiet. With no more busy work days and no clear schedule, he found himself feeling lost. Every morning, Thomas woke up with a cup of coffee, slowly growing cold in his hand, staring blankly at the TV screen without actually watching anything. In the afternoon, he wandered around the house, unsure of how to pass the time. In the evening, he sat alone in a quiet room, immersed in thoughts about the past, the days when he was young, full of energy and ambition. Since his wife passed away more than a decade ago, Thomas had been living alone. He didn't have many friends, and his social connections gradually faded. The feeling of loneliness crept into every corner of his home. The family photos on the bookshelf became the only reminders of the happy days that had passed. But instead of bringing comfort, they made him feel sadder and more regretful than ever. Is this all that's left for me? Thomas wondered. Like many other elderly people, Thomas felt anxious about his health and aging. He began to notice more frequent aches and pains, signs of memory decline, and an unexplained sense of fatigue. He feared that he was gradually becoming a burden, not only to his children, but also to himself. With each passing day, that fear grew stronger, pushing him into a state of despair and hopelessness. But then everything began to change on a crisp autumn afternoon. That day, Thomas decided to take a walk in the nearby park, something he hadn't done in a long time. As he slowly walked past rows of trees shedding their leaves, he suddenly noticed an elderly woman sitting on a bench. She was carefully arranging wildflowers in a small vase. There was something about her, perhaps the peacefulness on her face or the lively sparkle in her eyes, that made Thomas stop. When their eyes met, the woman offered a warm smile and invited Thomas to sit down. "Hello, are you here to enjoy the fresh air too?" she asked in a gentle, soothing voice. The woman's name was Sophia. She was a retired teacher who had been living alone since her husband passed away. But unlike Thomas, Sophia didn't let loneliness take over her life. She found joy in the little things, caring for wildflowers, taking daily walks, and chatting with people around her. "Life can be so short," she told Thomas. "But if we learn to cherish every small moment, each day becomes meaningful." Sophia's words touched Thomas's heart. For the first time in years, he felt a genuine connection with someone. After that conversation, Thomas couldn't stop thinking about Sophia and the things she had said. He began to question himself. What had led him to live such a monotonous life? Could he change? And if so, where should he start? Those thoughts lingered in Thomas's mind. That night, he couldn't sleep. But for the first time in years, he felt a faint glimmer of light in the darkness. Thomas's story is just beginning. But what will happen next? Will he be able to overcome his fears and self-doubt to rediscover the meaning of life? Stay with us in the next chapter to explore Thomas's inspiring journey. A journey that proves it's never too late to change and live fully. If you feel touched by Thomas's story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next part. And if you've ever experienced feelings similar to Thomas's, share your thoughts in the comments below. The next morning, Thomas woke up with mixed emotions. Sophia's words still echoed in his mind like a familiar melody that refused to fade. But his initial enthusiasm quickly gave way to fear and doubt. I've lived this way for too long? Is it too late to start over? Thomas wondered as he stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. A man with grey hair and deep wrinkles etched into his face. The answer still seemed to be no. But he didn't know where to begin. Then something unexpected happened. While walking down the stairs to get the morning paper, Thomas suddenly felt dizzy. His head spun, his legs wobbled, and before he could react, he tumbled down the steps. When he regained consciousness, he found himself in the emergency room, an IV line in his arm and a sharp pain in his back. The doctor told Thomas that it was a sudden spike in blood pressure, something entirely manageable, but a serious warning. You're lucky, Thomas, but I strongly advise you to change your lifestyle immediately. Those words felt like a wake-up call. Lying in the hospital bed, Thomas felt more afraid than ever. Afraid that he could lose everything, afraid that he might never get another chance to change, but at the same time, a sense of determination began to rise within him. I can't let my life end like this. The next morning, Thomas woke up with mixed emotions. Sophia's words still echoed in his mind, like a familiar melody that wouldn't fade. But his initial enthusiasm quickly gave way to fear and doubt. I've lived this way for too long. Is it too late to start over? Thomas wondered as he stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. A man with silver hair and deep wrinkles etched into his face. The answer still seemed to be no, but he didn't know where to begin. Then something unexpected happened. While walking down the stairs to get the morning paper, Thomas suddenly felt dizzy. His head spun, his legs wobbled, and before he could react, he tumbled down the steps. When he regained consciousness, he found himself in the emergency room, an IV line in his arm and a sharp pain in his back. The doctor told Thomas that it was a sudden spike in blood pressure, something entirely manageable, but a serious warning. You're lucky, Thomas, but I strongly recommend that you change your lifestyle immediately. Those words felt like a slap of reality. Lying in the hospital bed, Thomas felt more frightened than ever before. He was afraid of losing everything, afraid that he might never get another chance to change. But at the same time, a newfound determination began to rise within him. I can't let my life end like this. After being discharged from the hospital, Thomas returned to the park, the place where he had met Sophia. Seeing him, Sophia couldn't hide her concern. Thomas, what happened to you? When Thomas shared his story, she gently placed a hand on his shoulder. I used to be scared just like you, but sometimes big shocks are opportunities for us to reflect and start over. Sophia didn't let Thomas dwell in fear for long. She began helping him create a concrete plan to change his life. Step 1, a healthy diet. Thomas had never paid much attention to nutrition. After his wife passed away, He mostly relied on processed foods and fast meals. Sophia helped him realize that food wasn't just to fill his stomach, but also fuel for his body and mind. She went grocery shopping with him, picking out fresh vegetables and teaching him how to prepare simple yet nutritious meals. A green salad might not be as tempting as a hamburger, but it will make you feel healthier, she said. Next step, light exercise. Thomas started with short walks around the park. At first, it was difficult. His legs felt heavy and his breathing was labored. But Sophia was always there to encourage him. You don't have to be perfect right away. Just go a little farther than you did yesterday. Gradually, those steps became lighter, and Thomas realized that each time he moved, he felt his body coming back to life. The most important step, mindfulness and meditation. Sophia introduced Thomas to mindfulness, a technique focused on being present in the moment to reduce stress and find inner peace. At first, Thomas felt silly, sitting quietly, breathing, and closing his eyes. But Sophia encouraged him. Think of this as a gift you give yourself every day. Gradually, Thomas began to notice a change. Negative thoughts started to fade, and he began to feel a growing sense of calm within himself. But not everything went smoothly. There were days when Thomas felt tired and wanted to give up. Old habits occasionally crept back. He ate sweets when he felt bored or skipped his walks because it was too cold outside. I can't do this. Maybe I'm too old to change, he told Sophia one afternoon. But Sophia simply smiled and replied, You haven't failed, Thomas. You're just taking a break to regain your strength. What matters is that you don't stop. Her words of encouragement kept pushing Thomas forward. After a few months, Thomas began to notice the difference. He slept better and no longer woke up in the middle of the night. The aches and pains gradually faded, and he felt energized every morning. Most importantly, he no longer felt lost or meaningless. Whenever he looked in the mirror, Thomas no longer saw an old, tired man, but someone who was truly living, really living. When friends and neighbors noticed Thomas's transformation, they grew curious and started asking him for his secret. Instead of keeping it to himself, Thomas shared his story and the lessons he had learned. Sophia encouraged him to get involved in community activities, organizing group walks, sharing healthy cooking tips, and even teaching mindfulness practices. Thomas had begun his journey of transformation and was already feeling the benefits, but this was only the beginning. Could he maintain these habits in the long run? And how would he inspire others to change as well? Join us in part 3 of Thomas's story, where he faces even greater challenges and discovers his true purpose in life. That morning, Thomas woke up with a sense of unease. His body felt heavier than usual, and a dull ache in his chest made him hesitate before getting out of bed. Looking in the mirror, Thomas saw an aging man with silver hair and tired eyes. He gently touched the wrinkles on his face and let out a sigh. Have all my efforts really made a difference? Doubt began to creep into his mind. He had done his best, changing his diet, exercising, and training his mind. But was it enough, or was it all just temporary? Lost in thought, a sudden wave of dizziness hit him. Thomas had to grab the edge of the bed to steady himself. Fear returned. He realized he hadn't completely escaped the shadow of aging and weakness. Hoping that fresh air might help clear his mind, Thomas decided to take a walk in the park. But just as he began his stroll, a sharp pain suddenly radiated from his left chest. He stopped, trying to take deep breaths, but breathing only seemed to grow more difficult. People nearby noticed something was wrong and quickly called an ambulance. Thomas was rushed to the hospital. Lying in the hospital bed, Thomas stared up at the plain white ceiling. The steady beeping of the medical equipment echoed in the room, a constant reminder that time waits for no one. The doctor entered, his expression serious. Mr. Thomas, you've just experienced a mild heart attack. Fortunately, it wasn't severe, but this is a warning. You need to take better care of your health. The doctor's words felt like a cold splash of water, jolting Thomas back to reality. He felt as if he were back at square one, weak, afraid, and directionless. I've tried so hard, and it still wasn't enough, he thought. A few hours later, Sophia walked into the hospital room with a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. Her warm smile helped ease the chaos in Thomas's mind. I heard what happened here, she said. I know this is hard, but Thomas, you've come too far to give up now. Thomas turned away, his voice heavy with doubt. I feel like I'm losing everything I've worked for. Maybe I expected too much of myself. Sophia gently took his hand. The wildflowers I always talk about, they don't grow in perfect conditions. They survive storms, droughts, and poor soil, yet they still bloom. And so will you, Thomas. Sometimes what matters most isn't how far we've come, but how many times we stand back up after falling. Thomas was discharged from the hospital with a renewed sense of determination. He knew he couldn't go back to how things were before, but that didn't mean he had to stop. Practical changes, gentler exercises. Instead of brisk walks, Thomas focused on stretching and meditation to stay calm. A heart-healthy diet. He reduced salt and added more heart-friendly foods. Frequent mindfulness practices. He learned to confront his fears through breathing exercises and meditation. Gradually, these efforts restored his energy and confidence. After a few weeks, Thomas felt strong enough to return to the park, but this time he wasn't walking alone, and he began sharing his story with those around him. He spoke about fear, doubt, and moments of failure. But most importantly, he talked about faith and perseverance. We can't avoid aging or the changes in our bodies, but we can control how we respond to them. One small step each day can make a big difference. Thomas's story quickly caught people's attention. A few joined him for his morning walks. Soon, the group grew and a small community began to form. The walks became a space where people shared their own stories, encouraged one another, and learned from each other's experiences. Thomas overcame his fears and turned his struggles into motivation to help others. But does his journey end here? Stay tuned for the next chapter to discover how Thomas takes his story to a bigger stage and inspires those who never believed they could start over. Change is never easy. It requires patience and courage. And have you ever felt like you were standing at the edge of change but hesitated to take that first step? Reflect on that feeling and get ready for the next part, where Thomas steps onto a bigger stage and proves that it's never too late to rewrite the story of your life. A few months after the community group had grown, Thomas received a letter of invitation from a well-known nonprofit organization. They wanted him to speak at a national conference for inspirational leaders and share his story. Thomas felt overwhelmed. I'm just an ordinary person. I never imagined standing on a big stage like that. Sophia, who had always been his source of encouragement, reassured him. Thomas, you've already changed so many lives. Now it's time to help even more people find hope. Don't let fear hold you back. Thomas began preparing his speech, but every time he practiced, anxiety crept in. What if I forget my words? What if they don't care about my story? Sophia encouraged him. Thomas, remember when we first started? You didn't know how far you could go, but you dared to try, and that's why you're here today. Her words gave Thomas the confidence he needed. The day of the conference arrived. Standing backstage, Thomas glanced at the crowd of hundreds waiting for him. His heart raced, but as he stepped onto the stage, he saw hopeful eyes looking back at him. I once thought my time was over, he began. But I've learned that no matter our age, we can always start again. Thomas shared his journey, from days of loneliness and despair to moments of rediscovering hope and purpose. When he finished his speech, the audience erupted into applause. Many people approached him afterward to thank him and share their own stories. After returning from the conference, Thomas realized he needed to do something to ensure his legacy would last. Project 1: Writing a book. Thomas began writing a memoir about his journey, titled It's Never Too Late. The book not only recounted his personal story, but also offered practical lessons and guidance to help others create meaningful change in their lives. Project 2: Establishing a scholarship fund. Thomas set up a small scholarship fund to support young people pursuing studies in public health and sustainable development. Project 3: Online Community Program. Together with Sophia, Thomas created a series of online videos featuring light exercise routines and mental wellness tips. These resources allowed people who couldn't join in person to access support and inspiration from anywhere. One day, Thomas received a letter from a stranger. Because of your story, I found a reason to keep going. I've started exercising and reconciled with my family after years of separation. Thomas broke down in tears. He realized that his small steps had created a far greater impact than he had ever imagined. Thomas didn't just transform his own life, he left a lasting legacy for the community. But had he truly completed his journey? Stay tuned for the final chapter to uncover the closing moments of Thomas's story and how he continued to inspire future generations. One late afternoon, Thomas sat on his familiar wooden bench in the park, the place where it had all begun. The soft golden sunlight filtered through the trees, and a gentle breeze brushed against his face. He looked around and saw the morning walking group chatting and laughing. Many of those he had once inspired were now confidently leading and guiding others. I've come farther than I ever imagined. Thomas smiled softly, not a smile of pride, but one of contentment. It was the smile of someone who knew he had lived a meaningful life. At the age of 75, Thomas's health began to decline. His long walks turned into shorter strolls, and at times he needed the support of a cane. One morning, Thomas woke up with sharp pain in his knees. He knew his body was telling him it was time to slow down, but this didn't discourage him. He had learned an important lesson. Even if I can't go as far as before, every small step still matters. Thomas spent more time with his family, especially his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He told them stories about the challenges he had faced, but he never focused on the pain. Instead, he spoke about hope and resilience. A memorable moment. One day, Thomas's granddaughter asked, "Grandpa, how did you know you could change your life?" Thomas hugged her and replied, "I didn't know for sure. I just knew that if I didn't try, I'd never find out what was possible." Thomas's memoir, It's Never Too Late, was published and quickly became a symbol of inspiration. Many readers saw themselves in and historian decided to begin their own journeys of transformation. The New Steps group that Thomas had founded continued to grow. New members joined, and earlier participants became mentors, helping the movement expand even further. Meanwhile, Thomas's scholarship fund supported many young students pursuing careers in public health. Some of them later returned to contribute to his projects, ensuring the legacy of his work lived on and continued to make an impact. On a peaceful autumn day, Thomas and Sophia sat together on their favorite old bench. They were much older than when they first met, but their eyes still sparkled with joy and contentment. Sophia asked, "Do you ever have any regrets, Thomas?" Holding her hand, Thomas replied, "Not one bit. I've lived each day to the fullest, and that's enough." They watched the sunset together, savoring every peaceful moment. A few years later, Thomas passed away, surrounded by his loving family, leaving behind a life rich with meaning and invaluable lessons. At his memorial service, family, friends, and community members gathered to celebrate his life. Stories of perseverance, hope, and transformation were shared, inspiring everyone present. A large oak tree was planted in the park where Thomas used to sit. Beneath it, a small plaque was placed, engraved with the words, "It's never too late to start again." Thomas's grandson, the one who had helped him share his story online, took over the New Steps community and expanded it nationwide. He shared, "My grandfather taught me that change doesn't have to be big at the start. It just needs to begin with one step." Inspired by his journey, many who had followed Thomas's story wrote letters sharing how his life gave them the courage to overcome their struggles and start anew. Thomas's legacy lived on, proving that one person's story can ripple out and inspire countless others to embrace hope, resilience, and transformation. Thomas may have passed away, but his story continues to live on. It reminds all of us that age does not define your potential. Change is always possible as long as you're willing to start. Every small step matters, even if it seems insignificant at first. Thomas showed us that life isn't measured by the number of years, but by the moments that truly matter. Take a moment to reflect on the legacy you want to leave, not just for yourself, but for those around you. Your journey can start today.